introduction. You can always get more information and read more about it. But I think this is just a small introduction to the core of the discussion and the dialogue today, or the training, which will be Valentina's presentation following this one. So just to set historically the Convention on Biological Diversity, we need to go back to 1992, the Rio Earth Summit, where the three Rio Conventions, so-called, of course, were adopted. And the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, came into force in 1993. So there are 196 parties. That means countries in the convention that ratified the convention. So with the exception of USA and the Holy Seas. The three main objectives of the conventions, as per text of the convention, is conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of the components of biological diversity, fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of the use of genetic resources. There is one more thing that I would like to share on this, is the context, the historical context is very important because it signals a paradigm shift when environment moving from and advancing from the conference in Stockholm in 1972 started shifting and seeing environment as a critical component of development and a pillar of sustainable development. So this is really the context and CBD and the clear link and importance with the Sustainable Development Agenda. Next. Someone, thank you. So COP meetings are normally biennial. The only exception was, well, it wasn't a real exception, but because of the condition of COVID and the situation faced, meetings were held virtually. So the COP15 was held into two parts. And the last one, it was in December 22. So COP16 is coming up in October in Colombia, and COP17 will be held in 2 years from now. The COP meeting structure is normally high-level segment attended by ministers or head of states sometime, and a technical segment where negotiations take place. The high-level segment could be held before the technical segment or after, depending on the Secretariat's consideration and top bureau guidance. One thing about signing and ratification, you might already know, but signing is a pre-commitment to ratification, and ratification means that at national level, measures have been taken by countries to adopt and firmly embed the framework into their legislation. Next. Next slide, please. Thank you. The structure of the CBD, there is the COP. There are also a SUBSTA, what is called SUBSTA, Subsidiary Body on Scientific, Technical, and Technological Advice, and SBI. These are acronyms that we will quickly get familiar with if this is your first approach to CBD, Subsidiary Body on Implementation. What do? They're different because SUBSTA focuses more on the review, on on technical advice, and the SBI on review of implementation. Are countries who committed to implementing global biodiversity framework actually progressing and advancing on the ambitious framework or not? Next. So there is a convention secretariat, which is not a decision maker, is a body, that organizes, coordinates, and supports parties in their decision-making process, organizing meeting, and setting the agenda upon guidance from the Bureau. So it's more of a technical body to support the process and ensure the process. But there are also ad hoc temporary bodies, which temporary doesn't mean that they are created and last for a month or so. That could be just the working group on Article 8J, which is on traditional knowledge, which has been in existence and working and functioning as an ad hoc body for a long period of since CBD. Existent, and actually, interestingly, at COP16, there will be a decision about whether this working group or ad hoc body might be upscaled or institutionalized more as another subsidiary body. But that is a decision, important decision, that will be taken at COP16 in Colombia. Next. Mechanism of implementation. This is important. People coming to, if we are participant observers like most of us here, I believe, from civil society organizations or representing constituencies of women, indigenous people, local communities, youth, and others, they come to COP when decisions are made. But this is really the final stage of a long process where decisions and text of decision have been negotiated, discussed, influenced, and edited, changed during SUBSTA and SBI meetings. So the COP is really the last stage in the finalization and the adoption of the decisions. I'm saying this because it's very important. If COP, of course, is a big meeting and gets a lot of attraction and attention, but if we are involved or we want to be engaged in advocacy, coming to COP is a bit too late in the sense of influencing decisions. So our engagement and our process should really start at national level, contacting the country focal points, way ahead of COP, which, as we mentioned earlier, is held every 2 years. But once decisions have been adopted, then countries, parties need to do quite a few things, mainly adopt a national biodiversity action plan. And we are right now in the process of revising their MBSAPs based on the agreed global biodiversity framework. And then they will produce national reports where they share back on advances and challenges and success in terms of implementation of their national targets, and but also engage in and support cooperation and partnerships, and of course financial resources and mechanisms to support implementation of the global biodiversity framework. Next. Okay, this is just to add that CBD also has what we could call sister protocols, like the Cartagena Protocol and the Nagoya Protocol, which was actually adopted at the COP10 in Nagoya in 2010. That's why it's called Nagoya. But it's important here that we mentioned that once a party ratifies CBD, doesn't necessarily automatically ratify Cartagena Protocol or Nagoya Protocol. That's why you see different numbers of parties who have ratified. Is a different process of ratification. Next. Okay, yeah, let's talk a little bit about, very lightly and very basically, about decision making. So the Secretariat is not a decision-making body, nor are only parties are decision makers, the parties who ratify the convention. And decisions within CBT are made by consensus, which implies that sometimes there is a long process of and painful process of negotiation, because we need to make sure that all parties feel comfortable with the decision that is being made. It also implies that during technical negotiation and sessions like SUBSTA meeting or SBI meetings, draft decision might contain a lot of what is called bracketed text, because it is concretely in brackets. It means that that particular part or language has not yet been agreed by consensus and needs to go through another phase of negotiation. So COP eventually is where all the brackets, hopefully remaining brackets, will be lifted, as is mentioned, to have a clean text and approved. So two important things here. So the Women Caucus and civil society organizations are have a position of observers. That is a list, UN agency, non-parties, indigenous people. I also listed, we have IFB, the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, which is sort of representing indigenous people voices, the Indigenous Caucus in negotiations, etc. Same for the CBT Women Caucus, representing women's voices and concern on gender equality throughout negotiations. That we have the youth, industry and private sector, academics, and NGOs. And for NGOs, CBT Alliance is worth mentioning, because it's been the platform that really tried to bring civil society voices, and especially civil society voices from the South, into negotiation, to influence and provide input to negotiation. But we are observers, so no final decision makers. The way it works during a space so complex like COP, it's important that our plenary sessions, because this can be, especially if you're a first-timer to COP, quite confusing and quite overwhelming. So there are plenary sessions when parties convey their views, at the end of what they parties then observers, starting with indigenous people, Women Caucus, and youth are given the floor, and NGOs are given the floor to provide to share their positions and their input. But this input, this position, this statement that they read, because they are observers, need to be approved by it, to be endorsed or supported by at least one party, by one government, to be noted into the system, and to be reflected in the following a version of the draft decision. But everything cannot work in plenaries because it's quite cumbersome with such a large number of parties represented and so on. And some of these negotiations can be quite sensitive and quite difficult and quite lengthy, take a long time. So, for example, that's why the sometimes contact groups at the discretion of the chair of the working group. Yeah, I forgot to say that there are two working groups, usually during COP, one focusing more on resource implementation, finances, and cooperation, which is the body of work that SBI looks over. And another working group too, normally more on technical and scientific issues or items. So the chair of the working group both can organize contact groups. And contact groups are where, first of all, information and exchange during contact group cannot be made public or shared outside. It needs to be within understanding that this is a confidential internal consultation and discussion taking place during the contact groups. And observers are usually, but it's at the discretion of the chair, invited to be there and can have the opportunity to also raise their issues. There are also smaller groups like contact groups for especially sensitive issues organized and calls friends of the chair. And then, of course, there are always informal consultation, and that can happen anytime at the invitation of the chair of the working group, but also by parties themselves seeking consensus or a common agreement on issues. Next. Okay, just to mention that there are political groupings within the CBD representing where parties belong to. The Africa Group, Asia Pacific, GRULAC represent Latin American, Caribbean states, European Union, and others. This is important because political groupings do voice their position. They have actually regional pre-meetings every day, just like everybody else who's participated in COP discussing what their position statement might be. They do make their statements as regional groupings. And in some cases, for example, like European Union, sometimes is the EU position that overrides also member states' position in some of the negotiations. And usually during the closing or the opening, regional groupings are asked to intervene. And this is important because, for example, related to gender equality and one of the big advocacy campaigns of the Women Caucus on having a standalone target on gender equality, that happened. The big political support came during the reading of GRULAC's closing statement at the open-ended working group 3 in Geneva, and that was for the Women Caucus, I believe, was a very exciting moment. Next. Okay, just this again, what becomes an issue? What is always discussed at the COPs and during CBD meetings? Obviously, the frameworks, which are usually 10-year plans, which is let's say the big global plan for biodiversity, So the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted in December, COP16, December 22. And that sets goals and goals through 2050 and targets, 23 targets through 2030. So it's a period of, if you count, 7 years about to sort of stop and halt and reverse biodiversity loss. So no big, no small action and commitment there, but absolutely urgent and important to do. But there are other issues that are recurrently discussed and with different positions and papers on, for example, biodiversity and climate change, synthetic biology, mainstreaming of biodiversity. Now a big, which became also very important now after the experience of COVID, biodiversity and health. So just to mention that what is there to provide resources for all of this? So money is important. So we have Jeff, if you go back to the previous slide, thank you, just to know, because finances are important. Yes. So the main financing mechanism for the actions agreed under the CBD is Jeff, and but there is also other bilateral commitment by countries and other institutions. So I'll stop here. Maybe I've taken too much of your time today. And as I said, very basic, but I think it's needed maybe to have more of a sense of how complex the space and the process can be for our advocacy forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was rich, and it helps us to know where to focus on that focus. It helps us to know how to engage in the process and understand a little bit of where we can start by engaging in the process. So that is the work that we are doing in the convention. You are welcome to join. You are welcome to stay updated. We've been sharing different links in the chat. Join, read through our platforms as we have shared them, and Fatima can share them again. And you can visit our recent newsletter. So you are most welcome. If you have any questions, someone had asked, are we going to receive the presentations? That is a yes. After the 3 sessions, then we are going to share the presentations. So if you have any question, if you have any comment, any additional information that you want to share that helped you also to understand the process of the CBD, please, you're welcome. The floor is yours. Before we proceed to the next speaker, we are going to give it 3 minutes if no one is. And you can raise your hand. You can write in the chat box. Anyone who has a question or any suggestion or concern. Yeah. Okay. All right. If any question may arise, please put it in the chat, and our team is going to go through it and read. And then the speakers or anyone else, we have the allies of the Women Caucus here, so we are all ready to answer any questions. So let us move to our next speaker, Valentine. You're most welcome. Remember, we have interpreters, So you can join in any language. Thank you.
Hola a todos y todas. ¿Me escuchan?
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Sí.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Bueno, gracias Escovia, Cristina y
Thank you,
compañeras.
Scovia, Cristina,
Mi
and
nombre
dear
es Valentina
comrades.
Figueras.
As I was saying,
Soy de
my name is
Venezuela,
Valentina
estoy radicada
Figueras.
en
I
Brasil
am from
y
Venezuela, but I live
coordino
in
el
Brazil,
programa
and I
de género
coordinate
de la
the gender
Coalición Mundial
program
por los Bosques,
from the
que es
Global
una
Forest Coalition,
miembro activo, una organización
which is an
miembro
active
activa del
member
Caucus.
of the
Y
Caucus.
hoy voy a compartir algunas
And
reflexiones
so today I'm going to share with you some
sobre
reflections
en qué perspectiva,
regarding the perspective that we use.
en qué términos está o entra género. Sé que
And
tenemos muchas
we are going to talk about
compañeras y
gender.
compañeros de diferentes
I know that there's many
backgrounds y
comrades that have
instituciones,
different
y también
backgrounds
muchas que
regarding
pueden estar aquí que son
institution
expertas también,
spaces,
y
and there's
quería
other
que esta
people that may
conversación
be
fuese más como
experts.
un
So I would like
intercambio, un
this
diálogo,
conversation to be
donde también
rather
se
an
sientan con la
exchange, a
libertad
dialogue, where you feel
de
that
complementar,
you can complement all the
hacer
information that I'm
preguntas,
going to share with
por
you,
más
that you can
simples que
ask
sean,
some
no hay ninguna
questions,
pregunta
even if you
tonta,
think
cualquier
that
pregunta es
those are
importante
simple
para nuestro
questions.
proceso
Please take in
de
mind that there is no
aprendizaje y
silly
de
questions. Every single question
capacitación, de
is
construcción de
important in order
capacidades.
to
Entonces, siéntanse
train
libre de hacer
ourselves, in
cualquier
order
pregunta
to have this
o de
process of
comentar
capacity building. So please
cualquier,
feel free to make any
cualquier
comment
inquietud.
or ask anything that comes
I'm
to
going
your
to
mind.
switch to English now. Gender in the CBD is a conversation that I think it's important for today's session, of course. But before going there, I think it would be interesting to reflect on the relationships and the intersections between gender and biodiversity, and where we are in terms of those concepts, the initial concepts of gender and biodiversity. And one important element is to identify the influence of socially constructed gender roles and relations on the use, management, and conservation of biodiversity. In other sectors and areas, we see sometimes more clearly, but in terms of biodiversity and gender, we also see, and it is important to reflect on those socially constructed gender roles and relations, on the use, on the management, because the roles of women are different, women and men, and include different responsibilities, different priorities, different cosmovisions for the case of indigenous women, different access to decision-making processes and knowledge. And we have to understand and reflect about these different lenses to promote and understand the process on how to integrate gender equality within the convention, understanding how these socially constructed roles affect women and men differently and impact them differently in the management of biodiversity resources. It would be the first starting point to kick off this discussion. Another important element is gender-based inequalities. In this conversation within the convention, we believe that gender-based differences and inequalities are important, are relevant into the process, into the action needed to halt biodiversity and forest loss. And this is why we need to reflect about this gender difference and make them evident in terms of economic opportunities, access to land and control over resources, over biodiversity resources and land, and other productive assets. Also, as I mentioned before, in terms of decision-making power and action, access to those decision-making bodies that will develop urgent actions, women need to be part of these processes. They are usually neglected and excluded from these processes. and also the different vulnerabilities to biodiversity loss, to climate change, to natural disasters, and the impact in terms of gender violence, gender-based violence, and other processes. So women experience and are impacted at different levels when those elements arise into the process and into the phenomenon. And if we consider an intersectional approach, a more broader approach, inequalities go beyond women. When we have a natural disaster and we see that women are placed in an unequal position in terms of access to resources and to economic power and decision-making processes, it is not just about impacting women, because women are culturally responsible for the continuation of life. They take care of children, of people with disability and elders. So it goes beyond what is being identified as women as well. So three important elements would be gender inequalities in control over resources, the gender knowledge, which is also different in terms of gender. We know that women in traditional communities and territories are often responsible for growing food, for example. They are the main custodians of biodiversity with the different millennial and traditional practices that they have. Also, the gender differentiated biodiversity practices are going to be different according to the gender roles within the different communities. And those elements are relevant to take immediate action in terms of gender approaches within the convention. Gender in the CBD, I will share two decisions adopted at COP16, which are crucial for the reflections in terms of gender within the convention. The first one is decision 15.4, related to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or also known as KM-GBF. And this decision was adopted in Montreal in the last COP. And some of the elements, of the key elements that parties recognize and highlighted is that they are alarmed by the continued loss of biodiversity. We are all agree about the fact that, for example, 25% of species in assessed animal and plant groups are threatened, including around 1 million species who are under extinction, which is a completely alarming situation in terms of biodiversity loss. So in this, through this decision, parties agree and reach multilateral agreement in terms of having and developing urgent and transformative actions to halt biodiversity loss. And section C within that decision, we can share the link of this decision so that you can take a look and dive in more into these processes in preparation for COP16. Is an important element in terms of gender equality and rights-based approach. Of course, there are other sections that are important too, but today I'm going just to highlight section C and 5 elements of section C, because I think are fundamental to start building a reflection and capacities in terms of where we are in terms of gender equality in the CBD. So 5 elements in section C is recognizing the contributions and rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and not only their rights, but also their meaningful participation in policy action and biodiversity processes. Also the whole of society approach, meaning that action is related to everyone, involved in or to many relevant actors within the society. The human rights-based approach, which is also a milestone within the convention, the KMGBF, because it's not only the wording within the negotiated text and the decision, it's also what it is behind and what it implies in terms of protecting the rights of those who are at the front line of biodiversity conservation. And last but not least, gender equality is also mentioned in section C. Empowerment of women and girls, which means that it is not only relevant to have to increase the number of delegates, of women delegates into these processes. Of course, that is important, that is relevant, that is crucial, but we need access to the decision-making processes, and also those who are in the ground, women from traditional peoples, from local communities, from indigenous peoples, who are actually the custodians, the frontliners in the policy, in the action to help biodiversity. And of course, the relevance of reducing inequality, which is another element highlighted in section C of decision 15.4. Targets 22 and 23 are also included in decision in this decision, and they are also historic targets within the KMGBF, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Those are the gender, they are called the gender standalone targets. And it was a victory that the convention, that all parties adopted to include a specific and dedicated target to defend gender equality within the convention. And it has some elements that are key to understand this process, which is participation in decision-making. This is something that has to be included within the process, the monitoring framework of the convention. Also, include a gender responsive approach, which means that there are elements that need to be considered to develop a inclusively approach within the convention. Also, equal opportunity and capacities for women and girls. The recognition of equal rights is another key element within Target 23. And equal access to land. So if you see, we go back to the initial conversation of the relationships between biodiversity and gender, and those elements need to be recognized in concrete terms within the convention, and actually Target 23 ensures that at least the framework or the ground is there within the convention. And also Target 22 is another important gender or human rights approach related target, which includes the respect and protection of environmental and human rights defenders, also known as EHRDs. Also, the element of access to justice is relevant, and also the respect for the free, prior, and informed consent is an element very strategic within Target 22. And also, again, decision-making and respect for the cultural and land rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. In COP16, decision 1511 is the second decision that I wanted to share also today. We will share the presentations, but also I think it would be interesting for you to check the original sources of this presentation, so that you can have the history back in the decisions at COP15. But basically, decision 1511 includes the Gender Plan of Action, also known as GPA. And one of this was a historic milestone in terms of gender equality, because it translates a concrete path to recognize the effective participation and meaningful participation of women in all aspects of the convention and all the convention processes, and particularly in policy and action at national and local levels, which is vital for achieving the long-term biodiversity goals and the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. So it actually goes in line with other previous processes, but basically the Gender Plan of Action has the purpose to promote that gender responsive implementation. And of course, it's a tool, it's an element that is going to support through its indicative actions the monitoring framework, or the framework of these targets, target 23 specifically. So the GPA was also designed to support a gender responsive approach, as I was mentioning, to apply the implementation mechanisms associated within the framework. Some briefly 4 elements within the GPA that I think are important to understand this big umbrella of elements to advance gender mainstreaming. Is that this decision urges parties to support and advance gender mainstreaming and gender responsive implementation of the KM, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So it is an important decision to encourage parties and urge them to make concrete actions to advance in gender mainstreaming. And also this GPA, or Gender Plan of Action, is a tool that is going to guide this process. Also, the decision invites them to implement this plan in synergy with other gender plans and strategies developed under other relevant multilateral environmental agreements, which means that the GPA is not a one size fits all, but rather an element that can be in dialogue with other plans and processes to reduce gender inequalities within biodiversity processes and environmental agreements. Also encourages parties to appoint and provide support for a gender and biodiversity focal point, which I believe is fundamental to support this process. Having a gender and biodiversity focal point not only will ensure advice and expertise into the local context and the local and national strategies, but also to have allies with different actors, civil society organizations, women's groups from the different territories on the ground, to collect efforts and actually develop concrete actions to promote this gender responsive implementation within the global biodiversity framework. And also, it's important to have a plan, of course, but we need resources, right? We need funds to develop the different phases and of the plan. And also the document, this decision invites the different funding actors from multilateral organizations, bilateral organizations, to provide technical and financial support to implement the Gender Plan of Action, or the GPA. I will share briefly some of the gender achievements all over these years, so that you can have an idea of how this process has been and also has been developed through the collective action of the Women's Caucus. This particular slide has been previously shared in some of the trainings of the Caucus, but I think it is interesting to revisit it to see how this collective work has being developed over the last few years. In 2008, at COP9, the first gender plan of action was developed, and women participants conceived the seminal idea of having a caucus, a women's caucus. In 2010, at COP10, the first meetings took place, and then some collaborations initiated in this process of achieving more visibility, more recognition, and achieving concrete outcomes within the convention. Then in 2012, at COP11, at least 8 decisions related to gender equality and women participation were adopted. So you see, in 2 years, this collective organization of different groups from different backgrounds and expertise actually managed to achieve concrete outcomes. So this is really important that you are joining this session and also hopefully joining the caucus, because together we can work so that to change the picture and to change the process, and hopefully ensure a successful gender transformative implementation within the convention. Also in 2014 at COP12, the second gender plan of action was developed, and of course, to implement it, some resources were allocated to implement the actions drafted there. And then in 2016, at COP13, the caucus got more visibility and recognition. And of course, we got some remarkable achievements building on the legacy of the Indigenous Women's Biodiversity Network. And in 2018, at COP14, we got the Gender Responsive Post-2020 GBF. We successfully advocated for an explicit decision urging a gender responsive post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So you see this, it was a process of fighting for recognition, of including the gender, the intersection of gender and biodiversity within the high-level biodiversity negotiations. And in 2022, in Montreal, in the last COP, we achieved the historic milestone of approving or gaining the groundbreaking victory of having a standalone gender equality target and also the gender plan of action within the framework. I will leave it here. Thank you. And if you have any questions or any comments, or also if you would like to complement within these processes, I would like to, before closing my presentation, I also would like to recognize the commitment of many women who might not be here in this session to actually achieve these milestones, and also to their organizations. Thank you. Back to you, Scovia.
Thank you, Valentin. And thank you everyone who is still here. The number continues to increase instead of reducing. So thank you everyone. Thank you, Valentin, for making us go through the intersectionality between gender and biodiversity. After understanding the CBD as a process, then how can relate gender and biodiversity. So this is the time for everyone who has a question, either to the first speaker, Christine, or to the second speaker, Valentin. We had already, as I wait for more questions in the chat box, you can also open your microphone and ask any question. Remember, we have interpreters, so any language will be able to answer the question. Then we have different platforms of the Women Caucus. You can visit them in the chat box. And anyone who go through and you're willing to join the Women Caucus, we have the links for those who are joining as individuals and those who are joining as organizations. Feel free and then visit our recent newspaper. We had one question that is in the chat box. I think this is for Christine, but anyone else here can add on. So Kyla, hopefully I pronounced the name rightly. She asked what is the difference between the Nagoya Protocol and the Nagoya Kuraramo Protocol and Nagoya Protocol. So maybe Christina, you had answered or replied to hi in the chat box, but even for others who may not know and didn't read that, you can share it with them again. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said, had to think about it a little bit, but so it is a supplementary protocol to the Cartagena protocol. So as briefly mentioned earlier, the Cartagena protocol has a longer history, it's from 2003, and is around living and modified organisms and their risk of biosafety and to human health. While the Nagoya Protocol, which was agreed in Nagoya at COP10, actually, but came into force in 2014, is about fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources and access to genetic resources. So basically, that's the little bit of the technical answer I can give you, but please, others, senior experts can jump in and say more on this. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Tiffany, do you want to open your microphone and ask your question?
Sure, thank you, Scovia. And thank you so much for holding these sessions. Today has been great, and I'm looking forward to the next two as well. It's wonderful to connect with people. I just wanted to raise this idea of having not just the general CBD national focal point for the convention overall, but having this national focal point specifically for gender and biodiversity. I'm supporting Pacific Small Island developing states in this process, and we face a significant capacity challenge, just having enough people and certainly enough people with enough expertise and time to be able to take on these kind of roles and these actions. So I expect this to be part of the discussion at COP in terms of countries considering what resources and what support and what partnerships we need for implementation of the framework, but also of the gender plan of actions within countries and taking on this role. So I would love to connect with others to hear what you're thinking, what you are, what your delegations are considering in terms of presenting ideas for the way forward, and how to use partnerships to make sure that we have something of the equivalent of a gender and biodiversity point that can serve a country, even if that capacity is really limited within inside a national team. Thanks.
Thank you, Tiffany. Off to you, I think, Valentin. But anyone else can add on, but first, Valentin, thank you.
No, yes, thank you. Also, Christine, if you want to compliment, it's a really interesting question, and actually, thank you for raising the relevance of having partnerships. I think that one first step is this kind of meetings and sessions and connecting with the Women's Caucus, because we realize about the real partnerships that we have to support this process of appointing focal points and supporting actually and considering the support of parties for this process. I think that there are parties that have the commitment and have not only the political commitment, but also the resources to do it. And this is important, this is great, but also we are aware of some limited capacities. And this is what we also support the process of having or bringing parties, friends of the Women's Caucus, so that we can actually ensure and support that the tools, the considerations relevant to the discussions and the different negotiation items are in line with the expertise that the caucus has. I do agree with you in terms of hoping that parties can actually engage into this conversation. I do believe that in some of the events that the Women's Caucus is organizing, we will raise this issue for sure. And if not, if we don't have it in the agenda, we will definitely consider to include this as an important element, because we need to start creating concrete steps towards this process of supporting gender focal points. And the other thing that I think it's also critical is to support partnerships and also to advocate for resources, you know, because we need implementation. We have a gender plan of action, Target 23 and Targets 22 are part of this effort to ensure a gender responsive implementation within the convention, but we also need concrete resources, financial resources to make it happen, right? So I think that this process of advocating and being in the process of supporting national focal points have to go in line, in dialogue with the demand to have access to resources, you know. And also, Cristina, if you want to complement, or any other colleague from the caucus or from any other organization, please also welcome to put your reflections here in this dialogue.
Maybe I'll add a couple of smaller points, Valentina, if I may, and maybe I look forward to Anna to say something on this as well. There have been recently 2 notifications, right, from the Secretariat asking the CBD focal points to, what is the word, to elect, to choose,
appoint?
Select, appoint, thank you. Appoint gender and biodiversity national focal points. And I don't know what the number is around 50 plus countries. So that is an indication of the interest of parties and the commitment of parties on these issues. More is needed, and the way Valentina also explained the need for partnership, the commitment and collective action on this is really important. But historically, I would also like to mention that there was a group, there still is maybe, called organized and led by parties, the Friends of Gender Equality. So there weren't a lot of parties represented there, but it's still a good indication of how in certain parts, in certain regions, these issues are really key to resolving the crisis of biodiversity, and especially because I notice small islands, it is from those countries that a lot of support and a lot of concern around gender equality and women's roles in biodiversity is coming from. So just to add a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Any other question? I don't see any question in the chat. Yes.
Maybe Scovia, building on what our colleagues have just said, is that it is also important the work that we can do at the national level. For instance, parties now are undergoing the process of updating their national biodiversity strategy. And from our organization, we submitted a document with a series of recommendations of what we would like to see in the Argentinian strategy. And when addressing gender issues, we included a reference that Argentina needs to appoint a gender focal point before the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we will also do the same when the gender issues are addressed in the participatory process that is at the moment going on, with a series of meetings to advance the update of the strategy. So that is also another channel for, to advocate for gender issues to be better addressed within the CBD, not only at the global, but also the national level, and increase the commitment and level of engagement from parties. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was huge. I had a hand from Labin, and then we'll go to Kayla again, and then we'll go to Fatima after. So Labin, hope I pronounced the name well. You had your hand up. Babin, Rachel, the interpreter. Okay. As we wait, then Kayla again, would you? Okay, thank you. Kayla again, would you open your microphone and ask the question? Or you were introducing yourself? All right. Then you will write in the chat box more to it, and then we will read it. Fatima, you had your hand up before we go to the next steps and closing. Do you have anything that you wanted to add? So your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Scorpia. I want to remind you all about our upcoming sessions. So just keep in mind to join us for the second session that will be on August 23rd, and the third one that will be in September 6th. So looking forward to your participation, and please, I will try to, I was trying to share my screen to share the flyer, but anyways, I have already shared our accounts, social media accounts. You will find there all the necessary information, and also to register, and also to share with your network. Please don't forget to follow us on our accounts, and I have already put the link of the link tree where you are going to find many interesting link to how to join as individuals, how to join as organizations, and also our positions papers and statements, and also how to get engaged and updated, because we have recently launched our newsletter. So please stay engaged and stay updated. We will be sharing all the necessary information there, and also the upcoming events and opportunities, and the incredible work of the CBD Women's Caucus. So welcome to our community, wherever or whenever or wherever you are coming, and whatever is the background. So you are very welcome to join our family. Thank you so much, Scovia. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. Since there is no any other question in the chat box, thank you everyone for joining. And before we get our closing remarks, I want, as Fatima said, let us remember we have the 2 more sessions that are remaining, and every session has each content that has to be shared before we can go for COP. So today we had the chance to understand the CBD, the bodies and the governance, and then gender at CBD, and the intersectionality between gender and biodiversity. So then in the next session of 23rd, that is in 2 weeks' time, 23rd August. We are now going to see what is COP. When Christina was sharing, she told us all the COPs that have happened and how women have been getting platforms and the milestone that we did during COP15 in 2022. But then we will get the understanding what should we expect from COP as Women Caucus and all the allies, and then what are the items that will be discussed. Are they all include the language of gender responsive? Like, how can we be engaged and what should we expect and how can we be prepared? So don't miss out on the 23rd session in 2 weeks' time. And then with that, the links are in the chat, and then I can welcome Anna to give us the closing remarks, and we can conclude our session. You are welcome, Anna.
Thank you, Scovia. I will switch to Spanish. Muchas gracias por haber sido parte de esta
Thank you very
primera
much for being a
sesión.
part of this
Capaz
first
y
session.
agradecerle a las
And I
compañeras
would
que
like
nos
to
han
thank all the
acompañado con
comrades
las
that
exposiciones, porque todo esto
have
llevado
been
tiempo
helping us with the
preparar, y
presentations,
quienes
because we
están
have spent
bueno,
so
la
much
propia
time
Scovia y
preparing
otras
these,
colegas que han tomado la
Scovia and all
palabra,
the
pero
comrades that
también
have taken the
mucho
floor,
trabajo
as
tras
well as
bambalinas.
all the people that has been
Como
working
pudieron
and
ver,
they are
tuvimos
not
esta
here as
primera
you
sesión,
were
pero es
able to see. We
importante
have
destacar
our
que las
first session,
próximas
but I would like
no
to
van a
highlight
volver
that
a
the
tratar
next
estos mismos temas,
in
sino
the
que van
next
a
sessions,
tratar
we will not talk
otros
about the
temas de
same
interés,
subjects
por lo
as
cual
today.
les
We will talk about
alentamos
different,
a
very
ser
interesting
parte de las
subjects, and this is
próximas
why
sesiones,
we
porque vamos a
encourage you
tratar
to participate
otros
in the
temas, por
next
ejemplo, la del 23 de
sessions. For
agosto,
example, the
que
session
es
taking
de qué
part
se
on
trata
the
la
23rd of
COP16 y
August. We
por
will talk
qué
about
la
the
número 16,
COP16 and
cómo va a
why
ser
is
el
it the COP's
proceso,
number
las
16, how is the
negociaciones, los
process going
distintos
to be, the
grupos de
negotiations, which
negociaciones
are
que
the
hay,
different groups that
cómo se
will
puede
be
participar o
there, how
no, a
can we
veces como
participate and
observadores en
engage,
silencio, otras veces
sometimes as
pudiendo tomar la
silent
palabra.
observators, all the
Esperamos ya
times we will
tener
be able to
quizás más
take the floor,
detalles sobre los
and
temas
maybe
de
we will have
agenda
more
y
details
quizás hasta
regarding
algunos
the items
documentos
that will be
para ir
in the
explorando.
agenda.
No
Maybe we
obstante,
could
esto
share with
siempre
you some
lleva
documents that we will be
un
able to
tiempo para el
explore. Of
secretariado
course,
del
this will
convenio de
always
ponerlo a
take time
disposición
so that
y
the
en todos los
secretariat
idiomas
can
de
can have
oficiales
it
de Naciones
available in
Unidas
all the
y
languages of the
poder
United
elegir
Nations, and so
abordar un
that
poquito
we
mejor
will be able
desde
to
ya
address a
algunos
little bit
tópicos
better which are
puntualmente que son de
some
importancia para
issues that
quienes
are very
seguimos los temas de
important
mujeres y género.
for
Y en
us
la
that we are
última sesión
following
del
the
6 de
women and gender
septiembre
issues.
también
And in the last
ustedes
session that
considerarán
will take
cómo
place on
poder
the 6th of
navegar
September, you will
el sitio
understand how
web
could
del
you
CDB,
navigate
pero
the website
particularmente que
of the
no es
CDB,
fácil
and
de estudiarlo
especially
y de
it is
encontrar
not
las
pretty,
cosas,
it
pero
is not
sobre
easy
todo
to
en la
find things
sección que
in
se
that
refiere
website,
a
but
la
we are going to
COP16, más allá que
focus
hay
regarding the
una página web siempre
COP16.
liderada por el país
There's always
anfitrión
a
de cada
website
COP,
that is
también hay una parte
leader
con
by the
documentos y
host
otras
country, and then
informaciones
there's
útiles
another part
a
with
tener en
documents
cuenta
and
dentro de la
useful
página
informations that we need to take into
del
account, and
CDB y
that
poder
is
entender
there
cómo
in
todo esto
this
funciona,
website
cómo
of
va a
the
ser
CBD in order to
dinámico, que a medida
understand
que
how
avanzan
can
las
we use
negociaciones,
it, how
los
this is
documentos
going to be something
que
dynamic
se suben van a ir
through the
cambiando,
negotiations. The
actualizándose,
documents that are
que hay
going to
posibilidad
be
de subir
published there,
las
they will
declaraciones
change,
oficiales
and we can
y de todos
also
los otros
publish over
grupos que
there
también hay de
our
sociedad civil
statements,
de
official
manera
statements,
online
and
para que
all the
cualquier persona
different
pueda
civil
acceder
society groups will
y
also have
bueno,
access
mayores
to this, so everyone
precisiones
will
sobre
have
cómo
access to
el
these
Caucus se va
documents.
a involucrar
And then we
en
will share
esta
with you
COP y
how the
cómo
caucus
las
is going
personas
to engage
interesadas se
with
pueden
this
hacer
COP, and
parte
how the
de todo
people
el
that are
movimiento que va a
interested can
estar
be a part of this
impulsando el Caucus
movement that the caucus is
en
going
esta
to
COP, ¿no? Y de
push
nuevo
during this COP.
invitarles a
And
hacerse
again,
parte del
I
Caucus. Se
invite you
compartió mucha
to
información
join
a
the
través
caucus. We have shared
del
a lot
chat
of
con links
information through the
de la
chat. We have
importancia.
shared
Sepan que siempre hay que
many
presentar
links
la
regarding
información
the
hay que un poquito de
important things. I
paciencia
know that
para que
sometimes we
después
need to
se les
take some time in order to
incorporen rutas
process
de emails
information.
o de
So
WhatsApp,
little by
etcétera,
little,
porque
we
lleva
will
tiempo y no
include
tenemos
you
todas las
in
manos
email list. Of
que nos
course,
gustaría.
we don't have enough
Y
time. We
bueno,
would love to
alentarles,
have
como les dije, a
time, but
hacerse parte de
anyways,
las
I would like
próximas
to encourage you
sesiones también.
to join the
Muchas
next
gracias a todas y
sessions.
por
Thank
todo
you very much to
también el
everyone
espacio de
for
escucha
creating
y el
this
respeto y de
space
participación
of
también.
listening, respect, and
Go ahead, Scovia.
participation.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Remember, we have all the links in the chat box. Before we leave, you can visit them, especially those that were shared during the presentation to help us deepen more on the process. Thank you to the speakers, Valentina, Christina, and everyone who asked questions. Thank you, Anna, for opening and closing for us. The communication team that is behind all this, and most especially the interpreters that have helped us with different languages, and to every participant. Remember, the Women Caucus is for you and me to voice up. Please be involved, be included, irrespective of different organizations that we are from. We are all women from different regions, but we have one voice. So please let us be together, and we make all the agenda items in the COP16 to have our voices, to include our voices. Thank you for attending. I will keep here for more 2 minutes, but everyone, we really appreciate. And let us see each other on 23rd. Bye-bye. I will keep here if anything arrives.
Gracias a las intérpretes, sí, que me olvidé. Thank you, interpreters.
Yes, and thank you
Bye-bye.
again to the interpreters. I forgot to say it.
Yes.
Thank
Gracias.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Muchísimas gracias. Hasta pronto.
Gracias, gracias,
Thank you
gracias
very
muchas y
much.
gracias.